You see, I'm Rachel Bennett, freelance landscape architect. The woman Debbie once fined $500 for unapproved solar pathway lights in my backyard, even though the county had stamped them compliant. I didn't fight then. I smiled, paid, and started watching. Every laminated sign she zip-tied to fences. Every new safety memo she invented overnight. The pastel swimsuit-only policy because bold prints lower property values. The no cannonball after V.M. rule because excessive splashing disturbs the aesthetic harmony of our premium community. The mandatory wristbands with parental consent forms in triplicate. Never voted on, never filed, but printed on her home inkjet like gospel. I photographed every single one. Time-stamped. Geotagged. Labeled the folder Debbie's paper trail of tyranny. I stayed silent because I knew the game. In Palm Grove Estates the loud ones get crushed but the quiet ones? We wait for the queen to trip over her own crown. That afternoon the pool had been packed with the usual summer chaos. Kids cannonballing before 3 p.m. of course. Moms chatting under umbrellas, the faint smell of chlorine mixing with desert creosote. I was sitting on the bench 5 feet outside the gate, exactly where the bylaws actually allowed eyes never leaving Lila and Max. Then Debbie appeared like a pastel hurricane. She'd been circling the perimeter for weeks, muttering about liability events. Today she carried a brand new master lock she'd clearly bought at Home Depot that morning. No HOA markings. Just shiny, personal, and final. She snapped it through the hasp, twisted the key, and stepped back as if she just cured cancer. "Ma'am," I said, voice low but carrying, "my kids are inside." "Open the gate." Debbie's smile never flickered. Section 4.7 of the Interim Safety Adjustment clearly states, "There is no Section 4.7, I cut in sweetly. "I read the actual charter. Twice. While you were busy laminating lies." Her eyes narrowed just a fraction the first crack. Behind her, old Gus Ramirez, the handyman who'd been here since the desert was still empty lots, froze mid-skimming. He knew. He'd seen her make him remove the internal emergency latch 2 weeks ago. "Snag hazard," she'd told him. Gus had muttered it was illegal. Debbie had patted his shoulder and said, "Don't think too hard, Roberto. Mommy knows best." Inside the enclosure Lila pressed her face to the bars. "Mommy, it's getting hot." Max was already crying quietly, my tough little boy who never cries. The metal was baking under the Arizona sun. 20 minutes in there and they'd be heat exhausted. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and kept my tone light, almost conversational. "For the camera, Debbie, you just padlocked 4 minors inside a gated recreation area after personally disabling the code-required internal release mechanism. That's not a bylaw violation. That's a felony-level fire code obstruction under Arizona Revised Statutes 36 to 1601 and County Ordinance 503.1.4. I smiled wider. "Smile for the fire marshal, sweetheart." Her clipboard actually trembled. "This is private property. You're trespassing on board authority." "Funny," I replied, zooming in on the padlock, "because the county building inspector who happens to be my husband is pulling into the parking lot right now." "Wave, Debbie." Mark's county truck rolled up slow and official, lights off but authority radiating like heat off the asphalt. He stepped out in his khaki uniform, badge catching the sun, and the entire vibe of the pool deck changed. Neighbors who'd been pretending to scroll on their phones suddenly found their spines. Debbie's pastel armor suddenly looked cheap. "Deborah," Mark said, voice calm as always, "step away from the gate." "This is an HOA matter," she snapped, but her voice had gone up an octave, the sound of a tyrant realizing the peasants brought receipts. Mark didn't raise his voice. He never does. He just walked the perimeter, phone out, photographing the missing internal latch, the personal padlock, the lack of any emergency signage. "You certified this facility compliant 3 weeks ago," he said, almost conversationally. "Signed the renewal yourself. Yet the mandatory egress hardware is gone. Kids are trapped. One of them is bleeding from scraping his knee on the steps because he panicked." He looked straight at her. "That's not discretion, Debbie. That's negligence with a side of fraud." Debbie's smile finally shattered. "I was protecting the children. By locking them in a metal cage in 107-degree heat?" I asked, still recording. That's some next-level mothering, Karen. Sorry, Debbie. The neighbors laughed. Actually laughed. The kind of nervous, relieved laugh that happens when the bully finally gets called out in public. Gus Ramirez set his skimmer down. For the first time in years he didn't look away. She told me to take the latch out, he said loud enough for everyone. Said it was temporary. Made me initial the work order. Told me not to tell the board. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the same one I'd watched him photocopy in secret 2 days earlier. I kept a copy. Figured somebody might need it when this blew up. Debbie's face went the color of spoiled milk. You're fired, Roberto. Too late, Mark said, unlocking the gate with bolt cutters from his truck. The padlock hit the concrete with a beautiful final clink. Lila and Max flew into my arms, wet and shaking. I held them tight, breathing in chlorine and relief, while Debbie stood there clutching her useless clipboard like a life raft in the desert. But this wasn't over. Not even close. Because I still had the folder. The timestamps. The screenshots of every fake rule she'd ever posted. And now I had witnesses who were finally done being afraid of pastel tyranny. That night the pool sat empty under a bruised purple Arizona sky, gate swinging open like a mouth that had finally learned to scream. Mark brought me iced tea while I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printed evidence. Every ridiculous memo, every photo of the missing latch, Gus's signed statement, the county safety certification Debbie had falsified with her loopy signature. She really thought she was untouchable, I muttered, circling the date she'd removed the latch. Called it aesthetic improvement. Mark's hand rested on my shoulder. People like Debbie don't fall because of one mistake. They fall because the rest of us finally stop pretending the mistakes are accidents. I've been pretending for a year. Ever since the solar light fine. Debbie had stood on my porch in that same pastel blazer and said, "We simply can't have residents installing whatever they want, Rachel. It lowers the tone." I'd paid the fine. Smiled. Then started my collection. Because I design landscapes for a living. I know how one badly placed rule can turn a beautiful neighborhood into a prison of petty control. And Palm Grove Estates had become exactly that under Debbie's reign. She'd banned holiday lights that weren't approved white only. She demanded residents submit paint swatches for front doors to maintain harmony. She'd even tried to outlaw backyard vegetable gardens because tomato plants attract rodents and rodents lower property values. Each new decree came wrapped in the same saccharine smile. It's for the children, darling. For our investment. The kids were asleep upstairs. Max still clutching the stuffed gecko he'd cried into earlier. Lila had whispered, "Mom, is Miss Debbie going to jail?" I'd told her no, but that she was going to learn she wasn't the queen. Now, staring at the evidence, I realized the real crime wasn't the padlock. It was the years of smaller locks she'd clicked shut on every neighbor who dared question her. The next morning Gus showed up at my door with a manila envelope and the look of a man who'd carried guilt too long. "I got copies of everything she ever made me sign," he said, voice rough from years of Arizona dust and silence. "Work orders, chemical logs. She even had me over-chlorinate the pool last month because she read somewhere that stronger is safer." Kids were coughing for days. He handed me the stack. "I'm 71. This job was supposed to be my retirement. But yesterday when I heard Max crying through those bars, I remembered why I moved here in the first place. Not for her rules. For the kids." I hugged him. Actually hugged the man who'd once quietly installed Debbie's illegal camera above the pump house. "You're not getting fired, Gus." "She is." By afternoon the neighborhood group chat, the one Debbie moderated like a North Korean news anchor, was exploding. Parents who'd stayed silent for years were posting old screenshots of her fake policies. Someone even dug up the time she tried to ban service dogs because they shed and shed lowers curb appeal. The fear was cracking. And fear once cracked turns fast into fury. Mark filed the official complaint with the county that same day. I attached everything, Gus's statements, my photos, the falsified safety cert, even a clip of Debbie's own voice on my recording saying, "I don't need board approval for safety matters." The fire marshal scheduled an emergency inspection for Thursday. The board meeting was Friday. I had 4 days to turn my folder into a guillotine. Debbie, of course, went into full damage control mode. She sent a neighborhood email titled, "A Message of Unity During These Challenging Times," that somehow managed to blame miscommunication and overly emotional parents without ever apologizing. She even offered free pool passes for the rest of the summer, as if free chlorine could erase the memory of my son's scraped knee and terrified tears. I printed the email, highlighted the gaslighting in pink, and added it to the binder labeled Exhibit A through Z. Thursday, the fire marshal arrived in a white county SUV, clipboard in hand, face carved from the same granite as the Superstition Mountains. Donald Reyes didn't smile. He measured, photographed, tested the new latch Gus had reinstalled at midnight like a man performing surgery. Then he looked at Debbie, who'd shown up in full makeup and heels like this was a press conference, and said, "Ma'am, you certified this gate compliant after you personally directed the removal of required life safety hardware. That's not an oops. That's a $25,000 fine per violation and possible criminal referral." Debbie's mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a guppy realizing the pond had been drained. The board meeting Friday night felt like the final scene of every underdog movie ever made, except the villain wore pastels and smelled like vanilla body spray. The clubhouse was packed, standing room only. Parents who'd never spoken above a whisper were there. Even the couple who always voted yes on Debbie's motions looked nervous. I walked in with my red binder, Mark beside me in uniform, Gus carrying the original work orders like they were Exhibit A at the Nuremberg trials. Debbie sat at the head table in a fresh pastel suit, smile glued on so tight you could see the cracks in her foundation. "Let's keep this civil, everyone," she chirped as I approached the podium. "We all want what's best for our beautiful community." I set the binder down with a soft thud that somehow sounded like a gavel. "What's best," I said, voice carrying without a microphone, "is not locking children in a 107-degree metal cage because you felt like playing dictator that day." I clicked the projector on. Photo 1, the padlock. Photo 2, the empty bolt holes where the emergency latch used to be. Photo 3, Max's scraped knee timestamped. The room inhaled collectively. "These are not mistakes," I continued, flipping through every absurd rule she'd ever invented. "Pastel swimsuits only? No cannonballs after 3? Wristbands with parental consent forms never voted on? You didn't enforce covenants, Debbie. You wrote your own fantasy novel and charged us fines to read it." A few people actually chuckled, the dark, relieved kind that says finally someone said it. She tried the classic Karen pivot. "I was protecting our property values. Children running wild, leaving towels on the latch. It was a hazard." Gus stood up slowly. "You told me the latch was a snag hazard. Made me remove it. Told me not to worry about the paperwork because you'd handle it. I have the signed order right here." He held it up. The room went dead silent except for the sound of phones recording. Mark stepped forward. "Under county code, removing life safety features without permits, and then padlocking minors inside constitutes willful endangerment. The fire marshal's report arrived this afternoon. Citation issued. Possible criminal charges pending." He looked straight at the other board members. "If you vote to keep her after this, you're voting to keep the liability too." The board secretary, a woman who'd nodded along to every one of Debbie's memos for years, cleared her throat. "I move to suspend Deborah Whitaker immediately pending full investigation." Seconded before Debbie could even gasp. 4 yes votes in under 30 seconds. Debbie's face went through every stage of grief in real time. Denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a hollow little laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "You'll regret this," she hissed, standing so fast her chair toppled. "This neighborhood needs strong leadership." What it needed, I said quietly, was people brave enough to stop pretending your leadership wasn't just control wearing lipstick. She stormed out, heels clicking like tiny defeated drumbeats. The door slammed. Someone started slow clapping. Then everyone joined in. Not triumphant. Just exhausted relief, like the whole community had been holding its breath for 5 years and could finally exhale. That night the pool lights stayed on late. Parents brought their kids back for an impromptu freedom swim. Gus handed out popsicles from a cooler he'd bought himself. Mark and I sat on the same bench where this all started, watching Lila and Max cannonball without checking the clock. "You know she'll try to sue," Mark said softly. Let her, I replied. I've got 3 years of documentation that says she's been running a homeowners association like a cult. Good luck finding a lawyer who wants that case. 2 weeks later, the new board, now with actual meetings, actual votes, and 0 pastel dictators, voted to install a permanent plaque under the pool clock. Simple bronze, elegant, exactly the kind of tasteful thing Debbie would have hated. This gate must always open. In memory of the day we remembered who the neighborhood really belongs to. Kids touch it every time they swim now like a good luck charm. Gus got a raise and a formal apology letter from the county. Debbie moved to a 55-plus community up in Scottsdale where, rumor has it, she's already trying to ban flamingos on lawns. We sent her a pastel welcome basket. With a lock on it. Just for laughs. I still keep the folder. Not out of bitterness, out of reminder. Because power doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears a pastel blazer and calls itself community standards. And sometimes the quiet mom with the camera and the patient husband is all it takes to remind everyone that rules are supposed to protect people, not imprison them. The neighborhood feels different now. Lighter. Kids laugh louder. Neighbors actually talk instead of whispering about whose roses are too tall. Last weekend someone put up a new sign at the pool entrance. Not laminated, not threatening, just hand-painted in bright, non-pastel colors. Welcome. Swim safe. Be kind. No Karens allowed. I laughed until I cried. Then I took a picture and added it to the folder. Because some stories deserve a happy ending. And some HOA queens deserve to be remembered exactly as they were. Ridiculous, dangerous, and finally gloriously powerless. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, was Debbie Whitaker just following the rules? Or was she the real danger all along? And more importantly, if your HOA ever locked your kids behind a gate, would you stay silent like I did at first? Or would you become the quiet storm that finally ended the rain? Be honest. Because the next Karen might be watching. And the next folder might be yours.